and welcome to Nat's News at Night. Today we're going to be talking about ancient Rome. Now, if you've ever learned about ancient Rome before, you might think we're about to be talking about the amazing architectural skills they have, or maybe the tragedy of Pompeii. And while these are both very relevant to ancient Roman history, we're actually going to be taking a deeper look at Roman theater. So let's hop into it. But first I'm going to tell you a little bit about the origin of Rome. So legend has it that Rome was discovered in 753 BCE by Romulus and Remus, who were twin brothers of the Roman god Mars. Ooh. Now in 450 BCE, the first Roman laws were created. And these were kind of just basic laws that like every government needs, but it still is important because they have a government now. And so these are actually called the 12 tables because they were written on 12 bronze tablets. Now, much later in 264 BCE, they fought in a series of wars known as the Punic Wars, and they actually won these, and they inherited new lands such as Carthage, Sicily, and most of Spain. That brings us to the birth of our first famous playwright, Plautus, and he was born around 254 BCE. Now, out of the 130 plays that he wrote, only 21 survived, and by that I mean they're still around today, and one of the most popular plays at the time were comedies, and Plautus was very well known for his rambunctious comedies. He liked to start them off with a prologue that would tell you exactly what was about to happen, and if that sounds familiar to you, it's actually because Shakespeare uses the same thing in most of his very famous plays, including Romeo and Juliet, and he actually took a lot of inspiration from Roman theater. His plays could be considered musicals because at least half of each of them were sung. They were also filled with super fun dances, and flute music was very popular. Now, he died in 184 BCE and wrote his own epitaph before he died. After Plautus died, comedy mourns, the stage is deserted, then laughter, mirth, and jest all wept in company. Oh, silly Plautus. Next up we have Terence, another famous playwright at the time, and possibly the first of color. He was actually a slave. And, Terence wrote a total of 6 plays, and all 6 of them survived, which is pretty cool. Now, unlike Plautus's plays, they were still comedies, but they were less farcical. They weren't as rowdy, they had a little less humor, weren't so rambunctious. After he finished his 6th play, he decided that he wanted to travel to write better, but didn't end so well because while he was traveling, he actually died at sea. So that was the last we saw of Terence. Honorable mention, Seneca, another very famous playwright at the time, only wrote 9 plays, but none of them were produced because they were so gory and violent. This is a quick example. One of them had someone literally tearing their eyeballs out, and little gory, so those were not actually produced. So ancient Roman theater was outdoors. They had these cool little coliseums that, were outside. So the lighting they used was the sun. So, that's just what they used. Now, sound, on the other hand, was their theaters were built in these little dome shapes, modeled after the Greeks, which we'll get into a little bit later, but the sound amplified off the walls into the audience, and that was their problem for that, or whatever. Now, for costumes, Roman theater was kind of more realistic, or they wanted it to be realistic. It was kind of far-fetched realism, but they didn't really dress up too much, but they did wear crazy masks in every production. You did not have a production if you weren't wearing a crazy mask. Insert picture here. So, yeah, they did what? Alright, now we're going to be talking about a couple things I found interesting and bizarre. So our first one is, in a lot of popular plays, it actually wasn't shocking at all to see nude women. Another thing I found kind of weird, midgets chasing women with clubs. Very popular, very popular. Why? I don't know. Now, another thing that was a little bit interesting was plays were totally free for the public, and all other entertainment was totally free for them because, well, first of all, Romans thought that it was kind of their duty to perform for the gods, and so the people were just kind of there. And then also, the government saw it as kind of people's natural right to have entertainment, and they weren't supposed to get charged for it because it's like their right to have it. Alright, let's go over some Roman theater vocab now. Our first one is histriones, which is a Roman name for actors who are not well respected. Ouch. Our next one is Scaenae frons, which is the elaborate background that Romans had. So this is one thing that was not based off of Greek theater at all, which a lot of Roman things were based off of Greek theater, but we're about to get into that. So they liked to show scene changes, which is something we definitely use today, and so they had some very fun backgrounds that they used and made. Now our next one is Fabula Palliatae. This is Romanized versions of Greek plays. Now, ancient Rome, they weren't the most creative. They based pretty much their whole society and theater off of the Greeks. And the Greeks were kind of more inventive, and the Romans were innovative, taking something that already existed and making it a little better. So, yeah. Alright, now we're going to get into some popular plays at the time. First off, we have Menaechmi, and this is by Plautus. So it starts off with a prologue, as most of his plays do, which tells us that there's a merchant who has two identical twins and takes one of them to a place called Epidamnus, and he gets kidnapped, and the father/merchant is so sad that he dies. So that's the end of the prologue. Years later, Syracuse, which is the other twin, for sake of making this easier, he's from Syracuse, and that's going to be his name because they are actually both named Menaechmus for some reason. Don't ask me why. So anyways, Syracuse comes to Epidamnus to find his twin brother, who we're going to call Epidamnus, and his brother is in love with a prostitute and also married, which, yeah, so he keeps giving the prostitute all of his wife's things, which definitely doesn't make his wife happy. So later he gives the prostitute one of his wife's dresses, and he's like, go prepare a feast for me. And so she does. And Syracuse comes, the other twin, and eats the feast, and he's like, oh my gosh, this place is amazing. I'm just getting free food, and this lady is like infatuated with me. And then after the feast, she gives him the dress, and she's like, sorry, this doesn't fit, take it to the tailor. So he goes, and meanwhile, Epidamnus is talking to his wife, and she's very mad that he keeps giving her things to the prostitute, and he's like, go get my dress back right now. So he goes to the prostitute, and that's when Syracuse enters, and he's like, who's this random lady that's trying to take this dress out of my hands? Because his brother's wife is there, and she's like, dude, you're my husband. And he's like, no, I'm not. So they enter Epidamnus. So both of the twin brothers are there. They see each other. The wife is over here, like, what is going on? And they're like, they don't put two and two together. They don't realize that they're twins. And how, don't ask me. But a servant on the street is like, hey, you guys are twins. And they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, we are. And that's the end of that. So, yeah, kind of interesting. Ancient Roman plays were a little, I can't think of a better word than farcical and confusing. Next up, we have a play called Hekyra, not really sure how to say it. This one is by Terence, and it starts with the main character, Pamphilus, who's in love with Bacchus. Again, not sure on how to pronounce that. One night, he's very drunk and decides to make love to this other girl named Philomena, and he steals her ring to give to Bacchus. Later, he consents to marriage and somehow ends up marrying Philomena, the girl he just... But he still wants Bacchus, he's still in love with her, and she rejects him, so... yeah. He's kind of forced to get to know his own wife at this point, and, you know, maybe that's for the best. But he then has to leave, and Philomena finds herself pregnant, and this is due to premarital misfortune. So she kind of has to hide this, because this was definitely frowned upon at the time. So she can't even tell her own parents, and kind of is like, oh, I'm sick, you can't see me. And Pamphilus returns home later, and the baby's born, and he's like, what? And he says, basically, I'm not going to take my wife because she did something naughty. And his dad is like, well, you must still be in love with Bacchus, and that's not true. But later he finds out that he is the father of the baby, and he's like, oh, well, I still love my wife then because I'm the father, and they live happily ever after. Still very confused on that one, but that's the play. So, you know, those ancient Romans. Anyways, I hope you guys learned a little bit about ancient Roman theater, and have a good night. Peace out. That didn't work. It's kind of hot in here. Now, since I've already done this intro like 5 times, we're just gonna get back into it. But before we get into that, let's talk about the origin of Rome. Okay, I thought that would be quieter. It's really not that. Okay. Romulus.
Are you recording?
Yeah? Do you say it like Romulus or Romulus?
I'm going
How do you know? And if that sounds familiar to you, it's because that's my brother. It's because keep walking. Kyle, this is for class. I can't put that in.